Well, I love that story. My name is Chris Kretzu. If we've not had the chance to meet, I'm the campus pastor here at South Hills, Costa Mesa. And South Hills is a family of churches, and I love that we get to be a part of something together. And it's so much more than just what's happening here, although as Matt articulated so well, there's always a ton of great stuff happening here. And so it's fun to be a part of this church with you guys. Hello to all of our folks watching online. I saw Blair out there and Alina hosting. And so thank you guys for joining us, the stay-at-homies, as I still like to call them. So we are finishing up a series we started at the beginning of March called How to Be Happy. We've been talking about this idea because I think that we all understand that on some level it's not a healthy idea or approach just to say, you know what, I'm just going to do whatever in life makes me happy. I think we all recognize that we have to live a little bit differently than that we need a different lens than that. At the same time, I think that we would be lying if we said that I don't want to be happy, that happiness isn't important. And so we've been trying to talk about what are the healthy ways, what are the ways that, through Scripture that God has outlined for us to intentionally approach and pursue happiness. And what we've been realizing over the last few weeks, and I think that we will again today, is that oftentimes happiness comes from cultivating something deeper inside of us, a different way of living, a different perspective on some of the things we are navigating in life, and a different way of approaching things. That's what we're talking about today. As we partner with God, as we experience life the way that God has called us to live and called us to engage with others, it actually helps us understand a different depth of happiness. Oftentimes what's sold to us or shown to us or offered to us is an immediate kind of momentary sense of happiness, this immediate gratification, this idea of like, if you have this now, it'll bring you happiness now. And that is true. There's a lot of things that will make you immediately happy, but those things wear off. And there's this sense of longing, of restlessness, of emptiness, and still trying to pursue that sense of wholeness. And ultimately, we can find that as we orient our lives around who God is and the way He's calling us to live. One of the things we're going to talk about today, we'll get into this in a couple minutes, but one of the things that is one of my favorite pastimes is putting way more pressure on a family vacation than it can ever really sustain. I don't know if anybody else can resonate with that. I think it may be like an American pastime in some sense. You think about movies like National Lampoon's Vacation, and I don't know if that's necessarily like if fatherhood was modeled after Chevy Chase in that movie, or if that was just modeled after the experience of fatherhood or whatever, but there's always this ability, and I grew up, we never flew anywhere growing up. We had a giant station wagon, just like in that movie, and we would all, the road trips and the fights, and as a dad now, I get, we just drove to Utah a couple weeks ago, and there's just something that is defeating when somebody has to have a bathroom break within the first hour of a road trip. It's just like, man, I'm not a good father. Somehow I didn't prepare our family for this. There's the invisible line in the back seat that the kids aren't allowed to cross into each other, which I remember even as a kid when my brothers would cross that line. There's all kinds of different components of these family trips. And as we get older and things are different, even when we think about different trips we're flying to or taking, there's just so much weight, so much pressure we put on these things to be perfect and also to give us something that we deeply long for. This idea of how do I pursue this perfect experience that will offset the hell of the last 51 weeks of work? How do I take a long weekend break that will somehow give me the life that has been slowly draining out of me every other day of my existence? It's kind of weird. It's a little bit, we put this pressure on trips, on vacation, on rest to give us everything that is taken from us in work, and it's really unbalanced. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about this how can we approach both work and rest in a way that makes sense, in a way that is healthy, in a way that it allows us to experience a sense of not only just wholeness, but also happiness in both of those spaces. I remember a few years ago, this is the last time that I tried to surprise my wife with a vacation. We just had one kid at the time, and we needed to get away, and so it was just her and myself, and at the time, Mason was probably about 5 years old, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to book an Airbnb. She uses Airbnb all the time, so I'm going to book one. How hard can it be to find a good Airbnb that's clean and respectable. I mean, she does this all the time. It's very easy, apparently. And so, like, yeah, and she'll love San Diego. So I'll book something in San Diego. So I'm going through, and one of my wife's other passions is budgets and not spending tons of money. So I'm like, okay, like, Chris, if you really wanted to enjoy this, you can't spend a ton of money on it either. So I'm just trying to do everything the right way. And I find this seemingly very adorable, quaint, as some people may call it, rental. And so we get down to San Diego. We drove past it 4 times before we were able to actually see it. I don't really understand how they get away with titling some of these properties. Cottage would be generous. It was like a back room kind of like add-on in Ocean Beach, which is just like a whole different vibe in general. We get in, there was a futon. Yeah. There was a bathroom, but it was in the same room as the kitchenette. So it was like toilet, sink, stove type of scenario. And, she just loved it and was so grateful. We had a very nice time, There's this pressure that we put on these things, and obviously, there was a lot to be desired in that scenario. But in all of our trips, all of our vacations, all of our breaks, the time off that we want to take, we put so much pressure on it to give us something back that we've lost in the time that we've spent the time that we've spent working. And I think that there's this reality that I had to start to embrace and that I had to start to learn is that it's not that I was having necessarily bad vacations, it's that I had kind of a bad life. And that sounds very dark from a pastor on a Sunday morning. Let me just clarify. I was approaching life in a really unhealthy, unrealistic way. I was approaching work and the day-to-day ins and outs, the routines, the mundane in this really unhealthy way. And so what I then started to section off as this vacation is going to be an escape from the pain or the drudgery or the reality of life. This time off, this time away is going to then refill all that I've lost. It's unrealistic. There's one author, is a leadership author, pastor, speaker, and he has this phrase that really started to resonate with me. He says that good time off can't fix bad time on. Good time off can't fix what bad time on has done. Brokenness, unhealthy approach to work, rhythms, life, responsibilities, taking a great vacation, even if everything goes way better than it did in that Airbnb for me that week. Even if everything is perfect, that time off can't fix what 51 weeks or 50 weeks of time on of work in an unhealthy way, the damage that is done. And I just want to clarify, I am a big fan of time off and vacation. I actually think it's incredibly important. I made a document for my team, for my staff, on the importance of taking time off, because I don't think that everybody really understands how valuable it is. But we've begun to treat it as like an ejection seat from work, as an ejection seat from life. And if you start to kind of play out this idea of an ejection seat, this is something that you use when, if I don't push this button, I'm going to die. You don't push an ejection seat button because you think it's going to be a good time. It's just an escape. It's just a chance to possibly get out of the scenario that you're currently in. And I think that oftentimes we're approaching rest in that way, vacation in that way, leisure time in that way. It's meant to be an escape from life, but we cannot escape life. I think that there's a reality for so many of us that we live in this kind of productivity-oriented culture. Everything needs to be efficient, get done quickly. There's a sense of whatever you need to do to get stuff done in whatever way. It doesn't matter if you enjoy it or like it or if you're doing it in a good way or an ethical way. Just get it done. And that's what allows you to then live your life, to live a better life, to enjoy time. And it's a really broken and unhealthy way of looking at it. There's always a price to living that way. Getting a lot of stuff done often comes at the expense of burnout and exhaustion. There's all kinds of challenges that come with that. I remember when I was in college, in a different way, when I was taking classes, I'm not great at class or school or tests, so college was fun. But I remember I would have finals and tests and things like that, and I just remember staying up all night the night before, cramming and trying to learn everything I needed to learn to be able to pass this test. And I would oftentimes pass the test, barely, but then I would just be destroyed for days after. And this is like a little snapshot of what it looks like. I think in our adult life, oftentimes we continue to live that way, where it's like, you know what, just whatever I need to do, whatever the cost is to get life across the finish line, this project, this season at work, whatever it costs me, as long as I complete it, I win. But the reality is, not only do you often lose, but your friendships, your marriages, your kids, your community, there's a cost that comes to that way of living. We love the idea of enjoying life and living in the moment, but ultimately, we don't allow ourselves to really experience that until we've achieved the more important things. It's interesting, in the Gospels and throughout the Scripture, there's kind of this two different perspectives on this, almost competing messages. And in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is speaking, and he says this in verse 25. He says, "That's why I tell you not to worry about everyday life. Whether you have enough food and drink or enough clothes to wear, isn't life more than food and your body more than clothing? Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in their barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you more valuable than they are? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And why worry about your clothing? Look at the lilies of the field and how they grow. They don't work or make their clothing, yet Solomon in all of his glory was not dressed as beautifully as they are." You kind of get this sense as Jesus is talking, and you start to kind of have this question of, wait, so how much am I supposed to work? How much am I supposed to strive? How much am I supposed to push forward and make things happen and reach goals and make sure that we have food on the table? Am I actually supposed to just look at the flowers and the birds and trust that God will drop everything in place that needs to be there? Or what is the balance here? Because in other places in Scripture, 1 Timothy 5:8, for example, Paul's writing and he says, "Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." There's a sense where it's balanced out with this idea of, well, even if you're a very spiritual person, but you're not doing the work needed to provide for your home, what is the point? You're bankrupt. It's all for loss. There's work that needs to be done, which feels like it's going kind of against this idea of Jesus, who's, God feeds and clothes the birds and the flowers, and surely he'll do the same for you. 2 Thessalonians, another passage, says, "For you know that you ought to imitate us." Paul's writing here. He says, "We were not idle when we were with you. We never accepted food from anyone without paying for it. We worked hard day and night, so we would not be a burden to any of you." So again, there's this idea of what does it look like for us to not have anxiety and worry and stress about what does it look like to provide and meet basic needs, and at the same time, a clear responsibility to work, to try, to put in effort, to provide. And what does that look like for us in our lives? Because I think that most of us, maybe all of us, we naturally lean one direction or the other, two extremes, oftentimes pitted against each other. Sometimes people use these extremes to define certain generations, boomers or millennials or anything in between. But these two extremes, one is that people who deal with their unhappiness by not wanting to work, they just want to relax and do whatever they feel like in the moment. This sense of work is hard, it's unfulfilling, these people are terrible, I'm just going to live on a beach in Costa Rica. Which, I get it. It's like, sometimes it makes sense. But there's a sense of it's hard, it's overwhelming, it's not fulfilling, I'm not living my best life now, and I'm unhappy about it, so let me just leave it all behind, and I just deserve to relax and rest. And the other extreme is the people who respond to their unhappiness by only wanting to work. They never relax. They never take time to enjoy or celebrate or have leisure because there's a sense of I need to accomplish more or get more or save enough. and then I'll be able to rest. And the reality is that one group stacks up all of these impressive achievements and bank accounts and experiences and positions of authority, but they find themselves oftentimes just as unhappy as the group of people who have stacked up a lot of great experiences and also find themselves really unhappy. We've got to recognize that we're made to enjoy and be fulfilled by both work and rest. I want to say, because I can't talk about this as much today as I really want to. We don't have enough time. But in June, we're actually going to be doing an entire series, a teaching series, on this idea of work. And what does it look like for us to experience wholeness and purpose in work, in life, and the goodness that comes around that. So we're going to spend a lot of time, but today is I want to dip our toes in this because it's really important for us in this idea specifically of how we pursue happiness. Because a lot of us mistakenly pursue, submerging ourselves fully in work and kind of sacrificing everything to accomplish a job, a task, a goal, assuming that alone will bring us happiness. And then there's others that pursue rest and vacation and leisure as much as possible, assuming that alone. And what we see in the Bible is that there is this balance of both. Even in the creation story, you see this balance of both work and rest. God, in Genesis 1, it articulates this work that God is doing to create and how he's able to do this work and make beautiful things come out of this work. And day 1 and day 2, he creates and he works. And day 3, and it's not that, he got to day 6 and was like, man, I am burnt out. I cannot wait to take a day off tomorrow. There was this intentional plan, this purpose for this seventh day, this rest, this Sabbath. It was as good and as important as work. One of the things that we've talked about before, and every time I think about this, I get a little bit frustrated still. But work is something that God kind of ordained or orchestrated to happen even before there was sin. It was part of the original plan. Work, intentionality, using the gifts that God has given you, that was something that God told Adam, hey, I want you to do this work in this garden. Work has always been a part of the plan, and there's goodness in that work. There's wholeness and fulfillment, and happiness can come from it. And there is this beautiful picture of God at rest, taking a break, appreciating the beauty of the work that has been done and the goodness of life. You get to the New Testament in Jesus' life, there's a lot of examples. I don't have time to look at all of them today, but there's one point where Jesus is entering a city, and there's crowds of people following him, and he stops everything, and he says to this man who's trying to get a good view of him, he says, Zacchaeus, I see you, and I'm going to go have dinner at your house right now. And he just kind of leaves everything and all the crowds behind just to go and spend time in this home in Luke 19. There's another passage in John 4 where it talks about how Jesus was so focused on ministering to people and caring for people that he actually had forgotten to eat. And there was this reality that he was so focused in on the work that he wasn't even able to take the time or even had the thought of the importance of actually filling his body. And then again in Luke 7, Jesus is talking about how the Pharisees would accuse him oftentimes of being a glutton and a drunk, which you can't really have that happen unless there's times when you're just sitting around and enjoying a meal with people. There's this kind of back and forth, ebb and flow, this balance of the way that Jesus existed, not only in the work that he did, but also in the way that he rested. He enjoyed and was fully present in both the work and in the rest, fully present wherever he was. And I think that's one of the things that is important for us to recognize in this idea today as we close out this series. Because a lot of us, we long for our jobs to bring us this really deep, clear sense of happiness. And when it doesn't, it can be very frustrating and discouraging, and sometimes it can push us to make other poor choices. A lot of us long for these breaks and these vacations to give us this sense of happiness or wholeness that our work can't give us, and inevitably they fail us in some way as well. So what does it look like for us to be fully present in both work and in rest and experience happiness in the middle of that. Approaching all of life with an intentionality. I think that one of the things that we've seen, just briefly, we've seen this happen more and more, and sociologists are starting to call, they're calling out our ability to multitask. How many of you guys are multitaskers? So sociologists would say that you're all liars, because nobody, they're saying, can multitask. Now, when you read these articles, they actually start to call it task switching. And so you are doing a few different things, but you're not doing anything at the same time. You're just switching from task to task, and how it's starting to kind of fragment our attention and our focus. And we get this. We drive in our car, and we are listening to our phone read us a text message, and our kid is asking us a question in the back, and our food is going to be delivered to the house the same time we get there. There's so much happening at one time. They're starting to call it confetti time, this idea that it's like you're throwing confetti up in the air. And look at all the things. It's hard to focus on just one thing in life. We're so distracted and doing so many things at one time that it's difficult to really be fully present in something, in someone's life, in a work or in a break. So many people are taking their computers, their email, their work on vacation with them. So many people are taking, especially just the nature of work at home and all this kind of stuff, they have their personal life now also at work with them. And where are the lines? They get so blurred. We feel like when we're working, we should be more with our family and at home. And when we are at home, we feel this sense of guilt. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we need to be able to focus fully in and be fully present in both work and in rest. This idea I want to talk through today is that happiness is finding a rhythm in the work that you do and savoring life as it happens. We've had kind of a phrase, an idea, each of these weeks of this series, and there's 3 words in this I just want to touch on briefly. Happiness is finding a rhythm in the work that you do and savoring life as it happens. I started playing music when I was 11. I've always loved music. I always listened to it and wanted to learn how to play, and then finally I got a drum set when I was 11 years old, which was probably my parents' worst decision for the noise level of the house. But I played drums, and then I learned how to play guitar and was in bands and this, that, and the other. I always have music on. It could be a 3-minute drive, and I've got to find the right song for those 3 minutes. And I was just like, I'm all in on music. And one of the things that I love about music, and we got to experience it even today, is that there are just rhythms change, and it does something different to us, the way we experience it, what's happening. There's rhythms, there's tempo, there's dynamics. There's moments where the band is all in and everyone is singing. And then there's a moment where Jamie had the band kind of drop out and it's just the voices. And there's all of these differences that happen, and they're all beautiful, and they all make up this incredible experience. And I think that in life, there is this reality that there are rhythms in life, and sometimes we find ourselves in a place or like this in a song where we are moving quickly, and there is a fast rhythm, and there's a lot to get done, and then there's times when it's appropriate, and hopefully you all have these times where you feel like you are moving slowly, and that's okay. None of us want to hear just one rhythm for an entire album. We want to have some sort of dynamics and experience. There's even times when in music there's something called a rest. I guess that's all I have to say on that one. It's okay, and it's important. It's actually more than okay. It's important for us to recognize what does it look like to acknowledge what the rhythm is of this season. We're 3 Sundays away from Easter. So in my life, it's all speed metal right now. That's the rhythm of my life. It's just fast running to get to Easter. And then after Easter, I'm going to take a little rest. And there's as we are aware of that, it not only helps us, but it helps my spouse, it helps my kids, it helps me plan and prepare and be fully engaged, knowing I'm not going to be sprinting all year. This is a busy season for me. Rhythms are an important thing for us to recognize. The second one is finding the rhythm in the work that you do. Now, work is an interesting thing because I don't have to tell you guys, work is more than just the job you get paid for. There's a lot of things that we have to work at. If you have a home or your apartment, you have to work to make sure it's clean and functioning and all these types of things. If you're a parent, you have to work to make sure that your kids have what they need. And you could be a stay-at-home parent and you could work just as hard or harder as someone who's in a 9-to-5 job. Work is the meaningful tasks that are in front of us. And sometimes they're mundane. Sometimes they're routine. They're not always thrilling. We don't always get paychecks for it. But we find the rhythm in the work that we do. And again, those rhythms in your work, they change also. I think of that even just in relation to kids. When we finally had our second kid, finally, it sounds like it was like I was just waiting forever for this to happen. Maybe I was. When we finally had our second kid go to kindergarten, all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, there's so much time where he's gone from the house. It was like we joked about how we were like kind of like empty nesters. But there's these different rhythms of work that we need to recognize. And then the third one is this idea of savoring. Savoring is not really a word we use a whole lot, and if we do use it, it usually is in relation to food or savoring a meal. But this idea of savoring life as it happens, I remember it was probably a month ago, 2 months ago maybe, we got to go to this restaurant in Las Vegas called Best Friends. And it's this restaurant, this chef named Roy Choi, who's like this fairly well-known chef, really wanted to go for a long time, and we got to go. And it was like a whole experience because it's Las Vegas and everything's an experience. But you go in, and it kind of feels like when you go into the restaurant, it feels like you're walking into like this bodega, this little kind of corner market. And then to get to the actual tables, it's like you're going into the back storage room of this market. And you go through, and of course, there's tables everywhere, and there's a DJ. It's like, it's the whole, it's all Vegas. But we sit down, and the menu I wanted everything on the menu. So the server comes over, and he's like, hey, have you guys decided what you want? I'm like, I haven't. I have no idea what to pick. And then he says to me, if you want, I can bring out a 10-course tasting menu. And I said, yeah, obviously that's what I want. And it was great. And I get, some of you guys, I know people that eat because their body requires them to eat. Food is not really that of an exciting, but for me, food, I just love food. I love flavors. I love the whole approach to cooking and presentation and everything. It was this amazing thing, and there's no way that I could have made it through that meal without savoring not just the food, but the actual experience of it, all of it working together. I was like, man, this is incredible. I will not get this again anytime soon. This is a unique, incredible experience, and it's important for us to savor things as they are happening, and it can happen both while you are working and while you are resting. There is goodness in both of those areas. Savoring is similar to gratitude, but it's different in an important way. Gratitude is being appreciative of an experience. Well, savoring is fully occupying an experience while it's happening. Gratitude can happen in hindsight. We can now be grateful for something that happened 10 years ago. But I can't savor something that happened 10 years ago. Savoring can only happen in the moment. So there's this important distinction for us as we approach both work and rest, task and leisure, to not say one of these is going to make me happy and the other one is not, but for us to be fully engaged, recognizing the rhythm in work and savoring the good moments that happen in life in between. I want to do something just a little bit different than we've done lately. Rather than me just kind of keep talking about this, I want to invite up someone on stage. So Susan Devons, come on up on stage. Can you guys welcome Susan to the stage? You guys may recognize Susan, but I don't know how often you guys see her. She's here pretty much every Sunday morning at 7:30, and she does a lot to get the space ready for guests. And then she also shows up at least once or twice during the week as well. So Susan's here a ton and volunteers a ton. And your first Sunday here was when we had the grand opening for this building, right?
Yep.
So just over 2 years, you've been a part of the church.
2 years, yeah,
And one of the cool things is, as I've gotten to know Susan and hear a little bit of her story, it's an incredibly unique story that I've never known anybody that's been through some experiences like this. So can you just share a little bit about your life 33 years ago. Yeah, but, share a little bit about the before of your life. Yeah.
My whole life has been God. My uncles are preachers. I have missionary aunts. All I knew was God. And so I had this advantage getting through life. I had blind faith, and was a happy kid, and I'm just thankful to be one of God's children. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And then, I turned my microphone
Yeah,
off.
yeah.
And then, so there was something that happened, and
Yeah. And then 33 years ago, on April 16th, 1989, I was in a car accident. And this is all told to me. I don't remember. I was in a coma, so it's all told to me. But I was in Warner and New Hope, going to Los Caballeros, play tennis. And the driver of my car I was a passenger, made an illegal turn. And I got hit broadside. I broke everything. So I had the jaws of life, cut me out of the car. I don't remember anything. And so I woke up in the hospital, and I was in the ICU at Fountain Valley Trauma, and they called my parents to say she's not going to make it. So the last rites were given to me on that 5:30 on that Sunday, and so I woke up 3 weeks later, and I don't remember anything. And then I was 2 weeks Fountain Valley Trauma, 8 weeks St. Mary's Long Beach rehab, 5th floor, and yeah.
So, obviously it's an intense accident.
Yeah.
But there's so many layers
Yeah,
of this because
sure.
you had been a runner your whole life.
I ran my whole life, and I think for me, I just having God's faith and mercy on my life. I remember on a Friday I was told that I was in a wheelchair. I'm 30 years old, and I'm in a wheelchair, and then I go, wow. And so I thought about it all weekend. Like, if God wants me in a wheelchair, I call it a God event. It's called a God event. It was meant to happen.
Not an accident.
It was a God event.
So they said you're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life.
And so, gosh, that's not good. So all weekend I thought about it. And I go, if God wants me in a wheelchair to do His will, I'll be in a wheelchair. Tuesday morning, once I accepted His path for me, I got healed that very moment. I went home Friday. Perfect. I walked out of the hospital.
And how many marathons have you run since you were never going to be able to walk again?
8. And 25 half marathons, 8 fulls. And every step I think is a thank you to God. Thank you to God. I cry the whole time. I thank you to God. Thank you to God. Thank you to God. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. But every mile is God's mercy on my life.
Yeah. And that's the reason why I had originally thought about having Susan come up here is because this is what she's shared with me for the last 2 years. Is when she's run, because there's times she's like, hey, I just need to let you know I'm not going to be there on Sunday. Some of you guys never tell me anything. You just disappear for a weekend. I'm like, oh my gosh, where is everybody? Susan always gives me a heads up. She's like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to be running a marathon.
I'll be in New York.
But she's, we talk about it, and she's shared that over and over and over again. Every step she takes is an awareness that step is a gift, the goodness of being able to take a step. Oftentimes we find ourselves in a place where, we can't imagine what it's like because we've never been in that near-death experience. You had someone come and give you last rites, and then you get this experience. And even there's been times you've been serving here, and I thank you for serving, and then you say, thank you for letting me serve. And she always smiles and laughs at me, and I love it so much. But it's incredible because she does continue to there's this attitude of an awareness of what you get to do now that you didn't necessarily have before.
Yeah, God's mercy on my life. I know I don't have to earn it, but the mercy on my life. I want to make sure I acknowledge it, I share it. And he knew if he saved me, I would blab to everybody. And I'd tell everybody I meet about God. Everybody.
Can we thank Susan for sharing a little bit of her story? One of the things I think is so important to just focus on is that she didn't start doing different things. There was just a different awareness of the things that she was doing. There was a deeper awareness of the goodness. There was if you will, a savoring of every step that she got to take because of the awareness of what that meant, of what could have been. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we don't have to have a near-death experience for us to experience that type of awareness, for us to be able to get to that type of place, but it does take intentionality. And so just very briefly as we close out, I just want to give 3 things. And every once in a while, there's just, as a pastor, there's like a very kind of cheesy approach that I have to take, and I'm taking that approach today. So buckle up, you guys. But there is an intentionality, there's an awareness that we can bring into this, and I want us to be able to take this home and apply it, because like I said, we can't, it's not accidentally going to happen. And so I was thinking about this over the last few days about how we can take this out and actually apply this into our lives. And so how do we become aware to be intentional, to follow the rhythms of the work and savor the moments? And so I was thinking about this idea of how we can act. And so I broke it down into those 3 letters, A, C, T. And the first one is acknowledge. Guys, these 3 words don't even go together very well. I get that. But we need to acknowledge, we need to be content, and we need to try. And I'll talk about each one of these things. But I think that if we can hold on to this idea of how I should act, I think it will allow us to engage both work and rest in a fully focused and an intentional way that will allow us to experience a deeper sense of happiness in our lives, how we can act. The first one is acknowledge. James said it this way. He says, whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. Whatever is good and perfect. Now, there's this idea of this kind of grandiose idea of the Father of lights as it articulates, but then he also says whatever is good is a gift from our Heavenly Father. And so what does it look like for us to acknowledge the goodness? And it's not just like these incredible things, like I'm sure that Susan felt when she was able to go home from the hospital, the way she felt when she was able to walk for the first time after that accident. I'm sure that there is a gratitude and an acknowledging of those massive things. But what about the small things? What about the beautiful things? The little gifts, the little goodnesses that we get to experience in our lives? How do we begin to intentionally acknowledge those and recognize that there is goodness? Some of you, if you look at your job, your work, the time you're spending in the office, and it's so frustrating, what does it look like for you to begin to acknowledge the good things that you have in those spaces? The second one is to be content. Philippians 4 says it this way. Not that I was ever in need, for I've learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it's with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little, for I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Oh, you may be familiar with this last part of this verse, for I can do everything, or some people translate it, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And we think about this in accordance with like the massive obstacles of life, these huge tests that we have. But this was articulated around this idea of how can you be content with what you have? How can you be content? How can you embrace and experience contentment whether you have a lot or a little? Well, you can do all things through Christ. It is that big of a challenge. But in God's strength, we're able to actually acknowledge and not only acknowledge the gift, but we can also embrace contentment in that space. And then the third letter, the T, stands for try. Romans chapter 12 says, don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. It's interesting because he starts off with this idea of holding tightly to what is good and kind of embracing what is, and then it transitions into this idea of how do we continue to work towards more. And I think that's a piece as we think about this idea of how should I act. It's acknowledge the good that is in my life, the big and the small. It's pursuing contentment in the space that I'm at and recognizing that there is goodness around and God has given me what I need, and I can also still try to work, to increase, to do more, to accomplish more, and that's okay. But my happiness doesn't rely on that, and my brokenness doesn't come from that either. I was trying to think of a different way to do this, and not everybody is, some people are more visual learners, and I love Venn diagrams. And so I made a Venn diagram about what this could look like. You could be happy where you're at and work to make things better. And you can find yourself right in the middle of that space. You can acknowledge that you have more than you ever thought you would, that God has been so good, and you can be content, and you can still work to make things better, not only in your own life, but also in the lives of others. It's okay to be both. And in case you don't like Venn diagrams, I made another picture as well. I don't know what this is called. It's a circle with arrows. But you can be happy where I am so I can work to make things better and just kind of go in this circle. I am happy where I am. I acknowledge I've got goodness, and I have goodness in my life, and I'm content with what I have, and I can work to make things better. And if they don't get better, it's okay because there's still goodness in my life, and I'm content where I am. It's this cycle. It's important for us. It's crucial for us to understand this balance, that it's not work, work, work so that we can rest and be happy. And it's not rest, rest, rest so that we can be happy. It's this fully aware and engagement in our work, savoring the goodness in that space, and fully aware and engaged in our rest and savoring the goodness in that space. When we're able to fully be present, fully engage, fully be aware, it allows us to experience a sense of happiness that we don't have to rely on work or rest alone to provide us, but we get the full experience of life, how God has intended for us to experience in those spaces. Let's pray together.